Hello, and welcome to 10-Minute Movies, where we take cinematic masterpieces, and more frequently disasters, and splice them down into short synopses. Today we're looking at the first ever James Bond movie, Dr. No. The film was released in 1962 and was directed by Terence Young. It currently holds a 95% score on Rotten Tomatoes, and it kick-started one of the most successful and influential film franchises in cinema history. So, without further ado, let's get into the plot. The film starts with some questionable sound design, followed by the first ever James Bond gun barrel and a cool title sequence. We then fade into Kingston, Jamaica, and the Three Blind Mice, a trio of henchmen who have been sent to kill John Strangways and his secretary, Mary Trueblood. Strangways is the head of the Jamaica section for the British Secret Service, and he's killed whilst getting into his car on the way back to his house. At his house, Trueblood is preparing the radio for Strangways' daily call with London when she too is murdered. The men leave, but not before stealing files on Dr. No and Crab Key. In London, concerned by the disappearance of Strangways, the head of the Secret Service, M, calls for Agent James Bond. Bond, who is nearby playing cards, receives the message and leaves to meet with M, but not before flirting with a Miss Sylvia Trench and uttering an iconic line for the first time.
Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Bond arrives at headquarters and enters M's office, where he's greeted by M's sweetheart secretary, Miss Moneypenny. Bond is then summoned to M, who informs him that he is to investigate Strangways' disappearance. M also tells Bond that before he died, Strangways had been checking an inquiry from the CIA about
massive interference with their Cape Canaveral rockets. They think it comes from the Jamaica area.
Before catching his flight, Bond heads home to find Sylvia Trench from the casino. The two flirt some more before Bond heads out on a flight to Jamaica. Upon his arrival, he's met by a chauffeur claiming to have been sent to take him to Government House. Bond, being suspicious, rings Government House from a nearby payphone and discovers that they never actually sent a car for him. Bond decides to play into the man's lie, however, so he goes with him in the car. Incidentally, as he leaves the airport, he's trailed by two other men. Having established that the man must be an enemy agent, Bond gets him to evade the car tailing them and then stop in a side street. Bond then attempts to interrogate the chauffeur. However, before he can do so, the man kills himself using a cyanide capsule disguised in a cigarette. Bond arrives at Government House and discusses the Strangways incident with the governor before being taken to Strangways' house. There he sees Trueblood's blood on the carpet and finds a receipt to Strangways from a Professor Dent. He also finds a photo of Strangways with a boatman, and Bond recognises the boatman.
He drove the car that tailed me from the airport.
That's so.
Bond returns to his hotel room and enjoys his first ever vodka martini. He also takes some precautions so that he can tell whether someone's going to snoop his room by putting talcum powder on his suitcase and affixing a hair on the opening to his cupboard. Then he heads out to locate the fisherman from the photo. Bond locates the man, called Quarrel, and attempts to question him. Quarrel, however, doesn't seem interested in helping Bond and leaves. Bond follows him to a beach bar where Quarrel and the barman attack Bond. Bond overpowers them before he's held at gunpoint by a man. This turns out to be the same man that was Quarrel's passenger when they tailed Bond from the airport, and the man introduces himself as Felix Leiter, a CIA agent on the same mission as Bond, to work out who's interfering with American rockets. It turns out that the CIA have traced a radio jamming signal to Jamaica, but haven't determined its exact origin. Quarrel, who's working with Leiter, reveals that he had been guiding Strangways around the nearby islands to collect mineral samples. He also mentions the reclusive Dr. No, the owner of Crab Key, an island heavily protected against intruders. Bond decides to follow up the receipt he found earlier and visits Dent in his laboratory. Dent tells Bond that he assessed the samples Strangways and Quarrel found and determined them to be ordinary rocks. However, that fact is thrown into doubt when Dent takes a boat to visit Dr. No later that day. There, Dr. No orders Dent to kill Bond, using a tarantula. We return to Bond's hotel where he discovers that his room has indeed been searched. Bond goes to sleep but awakens to find the tarantula crawling on him. Bond is terrified, but manages to kill the tarantula using more questionable sound design. Having discovered that Dent is evil, Bond sets a trap for him and subsequently kills him.
You've had your 6.
Using a Geiger counter, Bond detects radioactive traces in Quarrel's boat, where the mineral samples had been. Quarrel informs Bond that some of the samples have been taken from Crab Key. Bond, now intrigued by the island, convinces Quarrel to take him there. The two head out in a canoe under the cover of darkness. They arrive at Crab Key and fall asleep. The next morning, Bond meets a girl collecting shells. The girl, dressed in a white bikini, is introduced as Honey Ryder. Honey, Bond and Quarrel head inland to try and find Dr. No's lair. However, Dr. No is aware that they're on the island and sends trackers out to find them. When the men fail, Dr. No sends a dragon after them. This dragon, feared by many local fishermen, turns out to be a tank equipped with flamethrowers. The tank attacks the trio, and in the resulting battle, Quarrel is killed. Bond and Ryder are kidnapped and taken to Dr. No's lair. They are decontaminated from the radiation they picked up on the island, and then they are taken to some hotel-like rooms where they're rendered unconscious with drugged coffee. When they wake up, they're taken to dine with Dr. No. Dr. No is a Chinese-German criminal scientist who has prosthetic metal hands due to radiation exposure. Dr. No reveals that he works for Spectre, the
Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion.
And that he plans to disrupt the Project Mercury American space launch from Cape Canaveral as part of Spectre's plan for world domination. After dinner, Ryder is taken away and Bond is knocked out by the guards. Bond awakens in a holding cell, but manages to escape by crawling through an air vent protected by an electric gate. The vent is then heated and flooded, but Bond manages to make his way through and out into Dr. No's control center. This contains a nuclear reactor that powers the island, and as the American rocket lifts off, Bond overloads the reactor, which causes it to melt down. Dr. No attacks Bond, but Bond overpowers him and manages to force him into the boiling reactor pool, which kills him as he's unable to climb out due to his metal hands. With the island becoming increasingly dangerous and unstable, Bond finds Honey and frees her. The two manage to escape the island in a boat as the entire layer explodes. On their way back to Jamaica, the boat runs out of fuel, but they're rescued by Felix, who arrives on a Royal Navy ship. The screen fades to black as Bond and Ryder kiss, and Bond lets go of the boat's tow rope. Thank you so much for watching 10-minute movies, although perhaps as we've run a little over I'll have to rename it. I'm going to try and do one of these every week, so if you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more, and I'll see you all later.